Hello and welcome to Literary Notes, a podcast by the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Well, the sun's finally decided to make its way to the Puget Sound for summer. You might be encouraged to spend a little more time outside, but some folks have been out and about all year round. Tom Fucoloro has been running the Seattle Bike Blog since 2010, and he's written a book about bicycles in Seattle, documenting their status as a fad in the 1800s to the vibrant bike culture we have today. The book is called Biking Uphill in the Rain, the story of Seattle behind the handlebars. He sat down with library volunteer Merri Ann Osborne for a very fun chat about the book. Here's their conversation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Merri Ann Osborne, she, her pronouns, and I'm a volunteer at the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library here in Seattle. We are joined in the studio by author and blogger Tom Fucoloro. Tom is the founder and editor of Seattle Bike Club. Originally from St. Louis, Missouri, Tom moved to Seattle and fell in love with biking as he made his way around the city. He's received multiple awards, including the 2014 Seattle Neighborhood Greenways Champion for Advancing the Cause of Safe Streets in Seattle, the 2023 Doug Walker Award by Cascade Bicycle Club, and in 2015, I like this one, Tom, Seattle Met Magazine named Tom as one of the 15 people who should really run Seattle. That's pretty cool. We'll talk about that one. Tom is also the author of the 2023 book, Biking Uphill in the Rain, the story of Seattle from behind the handlebars. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You know, your book is rich with history, stories, information, personal anecdotes. And while reading the book, I quickly realized that it's more than just about bicycling, right? You dig deeply into looking at the history of Seattle through the lens of cycling. And there's all these intersections that you write about. Growth of Seattle, gender, race, economics, transportation, infrastructure, affordability, health, politics, and most importantly, how to create a safe environment for cyclists, pedestrians, and car drivers alike. So I was wondering if we can just get a little bit of a start with what inspired you to write the story of bicycling in Seattle.
Yeah, I was approached by University of Washington Press. It was originally supposed to be more of like a bike culture book, and I was gonna sit down and have these long interviews, like, you know, kind of like the magazine style, like profiles of people who I think are doing interesting things in Seattle. And so I started that work at the very end of 2019, and then it suddenly became not cool to sit in someone's living room for weeks at a time. So what ended up happening, though, I think it ended up being a good thing, is I instead sort of pivoted and started doing lots of research about the history. And history was supposed to be just this like one chapter of many. And I just kept finding more and more interesting things, digging through archives. When the UW library finally reopened, I went and dug through like the microfilm, archives, and found all kinds of stories I'd never heard before, ways that they were surprising to me that the bicycle, like roles that the bicycle played in the city that I hadn't thought of before. And I just sort of let myself follow whatever's interesting, kind of let the research guide what I ended up writing. And so what ended up coming out was much more of a history book about the city. The city's not that old as far as cities go. And most of the city's development and growth has occurred with the bicycle already here, where, a lot of other cities were predated the bicycle, and the bicycle just kind of came in and was like a fad. But in Seattle, they kind of grew together, and the bicycle's almost always been part of what is happening in the city. And each generation would sort of use the bicycle as a tool in a different way. And I thought that was really interesting, the different roles that it's played throughout our city's history. And so what I ended up with was more of a history book than a bicycling book, which I'm really happy that that's what happened. But that was not my intention. It was sort of a happy accident.
So you're from St. Louis. Did you grow up bicycling? I mean, was that one of the things you did there?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of St. Louis,
Mm.
a suburb called Crestwood, and yeah, that's what I would do. I would hop in the carpool car that the neighbor was driving and get dropped off at my house, and I would immediately put my book bag down, grab my bike, and bike straight back to school to play on the playground. And it never once occurred to me that I could have just biked to school.
Instead of
But
going
I
through
did
all
this
that.
like every day. That's what I did. I would hop on the
Mm.
bike and I'd bike around the neighborhood, and um, but I don't think that I was abnormally into bikes compared to other kids. I think that's just what we all did.
Right, right, right. What
Um,
kind of bike did you have as a kid?
oh, I am
Do you remember?
I mean, a Huffy of some
Oh,
kind.
okay.
Uh, something you can throw around and it doesn't
Right,
matter.
right. Get a little scratched up. It's
Yep.
okay.
Yeah, the tires were always worn out because I was really into skidding. So I
Oh,
would skid up and
cool.
down I'd go down a hill as fast as I could and see how long I could get a skid mark. And so the tires were always just like flat and bare.
I love that. Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, that prepared you for your future riding in the city streets, I'm sure. So when you got to Seattle, was the bicycle your main means of transportation right away, or did you drive first and say, I got to get back on my bike? How did that happen?
Yeah, I was living in Denver before
Um,
I came here, and I had a car that growing up in the suburbs, the car was like freedom. It was my way to get out of the suburb I was in, right?
right.
Um, and so I worked through high school and put all that money from my after school job into buying a car and running that car and fixing that car because it was not a very good car. and and I took that to college, and then I drove it to Kansas City and lived there briefly, and then I drove it to Denver, and that's where my girlfriend at the time is now my wife.
Oh.
We lived together, and she was really into biking, and I wanted to impress her, so I got a bike. I started biking
Mm.
too, and I realized that I was just not using the car. I was just sitting there collecting street sweeper parking tickets because I'd forget to move it on street sweeping day,
Mhm.
and uh, I finally realized maybe I don't need this thing anymore. And so I sold it to someone on
Wow.
Craigslist. And I just remember this feeling, seeing the car like drive away and turn the corner and go out of sight. And I had this like euphoric, like weight off my shoulders feeling. I was like, I will never have to worry that a weird sound is going to happen when I turn the key, and that's going to cost me $1,000. Like
Mm.
that's gone forever. I don't have to ever I never have
Insurance,
to try to
all of
park this
this. Yeah.
thing in Capitol Hill of Denver, which is a very like dense neighborhood. Very difficult to park there. I'll never have to do that again. And I've never once regretted it. It was a very empowering
Wow.
feeling, realizing that I didn't actually need this thing that I thought was my key to freedom. And as soon as I got rid of it, I realized it was the exact opposite of that for me. So when we we used the money from the car sale to move to Seattle. And so that's why I showed up with just a bicycle and was
Oh.
biking around everywhere.
So, which lends the question, so do you have a car now? Does your family have a car now?
No,
Still no car.
we're totally car free.
So that's been well, you don't have to share, but it's been a while then. So,
So yeah, since 2009.
wow, with no car. All
Yeah.
right, then. Well, that's note to self. My husband always says it can be done.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and let's talk about how it can be done in Seattle,
Uh-huh.
because I'm wondering, so this is your main means of transportation since 2009. Are there any differences? What did you notice first about trying to bike in Seattle? Because in your book, you mention, of course, in the title, Biking Uphill in the Rain. I can think of a few things that maybe makes biking in Seattle a little unique
Mhm.
compared to other parts of the country. Can you share what your first thoughts were when you came here and saw the terrain?
Yeah, I lived up the hill in Fremont when I first moved here,
Ah.
up by like 43rd. So there's a very long hill all the way from the Fremont Bridge
Mhm.
up to my house where I lived. And the first time I did it, I was like, I'm never gonna be able to do this. And I barely made it up the hill, huffing and puffing. I was like, I'm gonna do this every time I leave the house. Like, there's no way. And then I was very stubborn, and I stuck with
There you
it.
go.
And after like, a week or two, it suddenly dawned on me as I was like pulling up to the driveway, like, oh, I'm not winded. Like, I feel okay. Like, it
Mm.
wasn't easy, but like, I'm not like devastated. I don't need to like lie down on the ground. And that was another like very empowering experience. It's like, wow, I can actually do this. Like I was still doubting myself up to that point that like this was something I could actually do. And yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that you can, I'm not someone who can exercise. I'm not someone who could ever go to have a gym habit and stick with it. I'm not a jogger. I can't run. So the bike is this like accidental exercise that I get that I wouldn't get otherwise. There's no way I would choose to do it. But because I'm biking, I'm just accidentally getting in better shape. For me.
Right. No. Yeah, the hills. I always, we'll talk more about electric bikes because I always see as I'm getting older, I'm like, ooh, I want to get one of those because of those hills. Can I still make these hills? But, when we talk about Seattle and going back and the hills and the terrain and the weather, of course, the way our city came together. Your book covers a lot of this. It starts from the 1800s, right? Mid 1800s, when the Treaty of Point Elliott came about in 1855, and the impact it had on the Squamish, the Lummi, and of course the Duwamish people. Can you share a little bit about that history? Because a little side note, what I really like about your book is you really dive into these kind of social, societal issues. The land stolen from indigenous people here, the inequities in the bicycle world and just in transportation and infrastructure, et cetera. The role women played in trying to join clubs but were excluded or made their own clubs. And are so, you mentioned your wife bringing you to biking. There's so many folks who love to bike and maybe don't have access. So starting with that 1855 treaty, can you share a little bit about the treaty and why, this is part of what makes your book, I think, really special. Why that treaty, the dislocation or relocation of folks who this was their land, and how that relates to cycling in those early points of history in the development of Seattle.
Yeah, the treaty was required under federal law in order to make claims using the Donation Land Claim Act of 1850, I think it was, which was this white supremacist law that said only white men and in some select instances white women could make land claims, but there had to be a treaty in place. And so there was a lot of pressure to get the treaty done so that they could start making land claims. And, this is it's white supremacist land theft. It is a disgusting part of our nation's history. And it's the lasting fingerprint of our city, is this initial land rush that occurred and people making their land claims. And then what followed was people kind of sitting on those claims and looking for ways like, how can we make this city happen? Because that's how my land claim is going to pay off for me, right? It's
all about money.
It's all about money. It's all about real estate. Yeah. It's so many things of back then sound very familiar once you start thinking of it in terms of like people are trying to maximize the value of their land and figure out how to do that. So as the city starts developing and the bicycle arrives, suddenly there's this craze. There's all this interest. People knew that bicycles were coming because they'd been reading about bicycles from back east because they were already a huge fad there. If you have in your mind like the idea like the penny farthing bike that has the really big front wheel and the really small back wheel. Seattle never got that bike. Like that was like an earlier phase, and Seattle was like a mud hole when that was happening. Like right. there was maybe like one of those in town, right?
Okay.
Like, it was the safety bicycle that really took the city by storm, and that's the first bicycle where the wheels are the same size, and it's got the chain and the pedals, and it looks like a bicycle that you would recognize today. And that's the one that the city really got into, and the people who owned land and the wealthy, powerful people in town saw the potential to build bike paths. And the bike paths could do a couple of things. One of them is that they wanted to ride their bikes and have somewhere to go. But the other thing is it could get people out of the city, the downtown, which was the whole city at the time, pretty much, get them out into these other land plots that were basically just forest. And you could see it and you could explore it, and maybe you think about moving there or something, right? So they're trying to use the bicycle as a tool for development beyond the dense core, because cities back then could only expand either within walking distance or along a very expensive trolley or cable car line. And they were hoping, well, maybe bicycle paths could be a cheaper, easier way to expand the city out and start making some money on these land claims that we've made, right? So that's why there was so much political power behind the idea of let's build bike paths all over the city. And they did very quickly. In just like 5 years, they built like 30 miles of bike paths around the city. And those bike paths became the basis for what would later become the boulevard system, the park boulevards, like Magnolia Boulevard and Lake Washington Boulevard, Interlaken Boulevard,
and Beacon up on the hill.
The Cheesty Boulevard on Beacon Hill is one of them as well, and Mount Baker Boulevard.
Interesting. So those were originally bike lanes.
Those are it's part of what was part of like the bike path network was it was like they were almost like tests. Like, is this a good route? Will people like this? Is this could we build a boulevard here? And then once the voters approved in the early 1900s, they approved a parks levy to build out the park boulevard system, and that's when they made them into roads. But then by the time the roads opened, cars had arrived.
Right, yeah. The arrival of the car changed a lot of things. And I'm wondering, back in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you mentioned that cycling had already been the craze on the East Coast, but it had come here from elsewhere, right? Like, what cities had already started? I think you mentioned in the book Paris, or in Europe, a lot of biking. Also in Asia, what did bike culture look like in other countries or spaces during that time then the 1880s in Seattle?
Yeah, in the 1880s and 1890s, the bicycle is like, it's a Maserati. It is like a very expensive status symbol thing, and having the latest model of bike was like, showing off basically. And so it's very high society, very wealthy people are sort of leading the bicycling thing, which is why the paths are getting built so easily, because it's like,
I was gonna say you can do that today. 30 miles of whatever bike paths in 5 years.
I mean, it was just like back then, if white men were making all the rules, they were in all the seats of power, and if they were wealthy white men wanted something to happen, it could just happen, right? There was wasn't a whole lot of discussion that needed to occur. And so that's why that explains how the bike paths happened, and that also then explains how the street network happened and the expansion of like car space, because it was this sort of the same people, powerful, wealthy white people who were in charge of the city, who made all the rules, who when the car finally arrived, that was a much more effective tool for like developing these land claims than the bicycle was. The bicycle is a little impractical to like move your whole family along to a bike path. Like, that's maybe asking a lot, but along a road and you have a car, suddenly that becomes feasible. And so the car, this is when we saw the very beginnings of sprawl. You could build just roads out to a plot and then have a neighborhood there. You don't need to invest in the streetcar and build your own streetcar line and pay to run it forever, which is what so for example, like along Madison was like the streetcar route, and that was privately funded. Private company wanted to develop Madison Park, and they wanted to get people between Madison Park and the city, so they had to build a streetcar line. It was very expensive to run, but it was worth it because it let them develop Madison Park. Well, roads come along, you don't have to do that anymore. It's way more cost effective just to build a road. And so that's sort of, so the bike was sort of a trial balloon for this idea that then car is like actualized and made real. And that's how our city sort of developed from there. But
and the streetcars and all that went away too. Eventually over.
Because the companies that built them and were operating them, they didn't want to keep doing that. Like, they made their money, they developed the neighborhood, like they got theirs, And so the city had to take over the streetcars because they were falling into disrepair. But the city didn't really have the budget to do it right, and that's why they started just dismantling them and putting in buses. It was just easier,
Right.
and now we're like, oh man, if only we'd kept those streetcars
Cars back, right? I know we want to. It's yeah. Human beings. What are we going to say? Well, during that time too, before the introduction of the car culture, there were all these clubs that started developing. I read in your book there was it was so big, right? When that there were marching bands that would be out there in a parade, and you'd have all these bicyclists on certain days, or what would that sounds. I can't imagine now. It's such a part of our lives, either biking or driving a car, but to have hundreds and thousands or hundreds of thousands of bicyclists in a parade showing off their Maseratis, as you said, and these clubs. What were these early bike clubs like? You mentioned probably predominantly white male, and tell us about the makeup, because I also read that, there were other people who would try to get into these bicycling clubs and couldn't. And yet everybody's using a bike. This is before the introduction of cars. So, can you tell a little bit about what the city might have looked like back then with all these clubs and people and infrastructure for them?
Yeah. There were several bike clubs that popped up that just would sort of organize outings, and they were documented weekly in this column for the Argus, which was a weekly newspaper at the time, and the editor of the Argus was a member of the bike clubs and was really into biking, and he was really into anything kind of high society. He was into yachting and things like that. He was an aspirational high society person because he himself was not very rich, but he liked to write about those kinds of things, and so he was really into the bicycling culture, and he had a cycling column, and it only exists on microfilm.
Oh, wow.
Or it also exists in my personal Google Drive because I made scans of all of the microfilm columns for 6 years of them, I guess. But it's cool because he documents everything. He'll talk about a ride. They rode down to Kent and
wow.
They showed up unannounced at the King County Sheriff's house in Kent. And there's this photo of them I don't know, dozens of people with their bikes just standing on the roof of this sheriff's house and all posing for a photo together. It's a very strange, surreal photo. But that was just their outing that day. And then the sheriff greeted them and fed them and stuff. I guess he was into biking too. But then he lists the names of everyone who attended this ride. It's this really long list. And you read it and it's like reading a list of Seattle street names. Because it's there's Nickersons in there, there's Denny's in there. It's oh, that's the kind of person that is going on these rides. The kind of person who has a family name that has a street named after them.
Right. Interesting. The power, as you said.
Yeah.
Also the
influence. And that's why the sheriff was happy to see them roll up in his house.
Yes. Please vote for me next election. I'll help you guys out. What, you want a new bike path? You got it. Even though that's not a sheriff's role, I'll make sure it happens. Interesting.
Yeah. And so Seattle's bike clubs also immediately distanced themselves from the National League of American Cyclists, or League of American Wheelmen, it was called at the time. And that national organization was having all these horrible debates about should we allow women, should we allow non-white people in our club and everything. And the Seattle group very quickly just decided they don't want to be part of that, and they made their own organization called the Good Roads Club. And the rules do not explicitly not allow people who aren't white or men. It's not written anywhere in any of the rules. But if you look at the membership lists, there are a couple women's names, but no women are in leadership roles, but they are on the member list. And it's really hard to tell from the names if anyone was not white. I'm not sure.
Right.
I would, if I were to wager a guess, I would say no. But it's hard to know for sure. I looked really hard. I looked at all the photos I could find.
And
it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to determine.
Right.
But I think it's probably safe to say it was mostly white people, if not all white people.
Right. So you just wonder, and even if someone's name is there, sometimes it's probably listed by Mrs. So-and-so, and you wonder what role, she might have played. It sounds like a very interesting time for the bike in that Seattle and for cycling, how important it was and how different we were than other cities. You mentioned in the book this a place that maybe people rode to and hung out at, the mystery of the lunchroom, I guess. Can you share, it kind of shows up in your book, and the lunchroom, and I was intrigued by it, and it sounds like you were too. Tell us about what you found out about what is the lunchroom, and what was, to me, I said mystery. Yeah, what was going on at the lunchroom, and what happened to it? And I understand nothing remains of it right now. But
yeah. So for basically the whole entirety of the early biking scene before the arrival of cars, by far the most popular bike ride to do that you go out on the weekends to do is you'd ride the Lake Union bike path, which went along the hill between Capitol Hill and the Cascade neighborhood and East Lake. And it kind of just rode along the hill, and then it would curve around at the top of Capitol Hill and head off into what's now Interlochen Boulevard. And they just called that the Lake Washington Bike Path. And you'd ride that out to your end goal is to get to Madison Park. And then halfway between downtown and Madison Park, what happens to be in the middle of Interlochen Park now, what was back then just forest.
Right.
There was this little house that was just like built along as part of like a bridge structure to get the path across a gully back there. They built like a little house next to it that had a little cafe.
Oh,
nice.
It's
called the Good Roads Lunchroom.
The Good Roads Lunchroom.
And so you could get, it was like 5-cent sandwiches and 10-cent coffee, which like I don't know if that means the sandwich was horrible or if the coffee was really good.
Right. Why is it more? Coffee's at a premium, maybe.
Yeah, and but there's lots of really like wonderful photos from this place because it was everyone stopped there and everyone seemed to like it a lot. But there's also this fascinating side note where there's this bike rack out front, and someone's carved into it Rainier beer, and then what appears to be someone else's hand comes in and added the word root in front of beer. And this is fascinating detail that I noticed in a photo because this is right before Prohibition was happening.
Yep.
And there's within the bicycling community at the time, there is this dramatic difference of opinions on this issue. And the most important person in bicycling, George F. Cotterill, who would later become mayor of Seattle and a state senator, and was also one of the first Seattle Port commissioners. He like helped create the Seattle Port as a public port. He felt very strongly about that. And before that, his political career, he was a city engineer. He was assistant to R.H. Thompson. So Cotterill helped design like the Cedar River watershed infrastructure and like helped lay out the plan for the industrial district that became SoDo and how they were going to fill in the tide flats and all that and what the roads were going to look like. And another thing he was tasked with doing was figuring out how do we get this bike path network built so that we can later develop it into a boulevard system. And so he became this like really important figure in making those paths happen. And he was an extremely staunch prohibitionist. He hated alcohol and his whole life. He, as a state senator, he actually sponsored the bill, a pre-prohibition law called a local choice law, basically allowed local communities and counties to vote on whether they wanted to be dry or not. And this was a precursor to the state just passing prohibition entirely, which itself was a precursor to the nation doing it. Washington State was part of a movement that kind of pushed the whole nation in that direction. And so on this little bike rack in the middle of the forest, there's this like debate happening among people who have like are going to have a really strong influence in the nation's prohibition conversation and what happened with prohibition
and the Denny's
and Cotterill, this guy who's going to go on and do this bill. And I just think that's fascinating. Like, in the middle of nowhere, way out west, Seattle is way out there at this time.
Right.
There's this debate happening on this bike rack that's important. That's important to our nation's history. And I don't know. It's just fascinating when you start seeing things like that.
Yeah.
And that's why it became such a history book for me, because it's like I keep
Right.
finding these details and go, I have
Politics
to
and
write
cycling.
this. I have to tell people about this. Surely no one's noticed this before.
Yeah, no, you're putting it all together, and in such what I would say, like there's always politics in sports, as we found through watching Olympics or the World Cup or women's basketball, or just there's politics there. There's all these behind the scenes, but and knowing the names and of those folks who kind of were in those circles and what their roles were and what they owned, for example, if they were business owners, what their special interests were, hearing about prohibition and cycling, and now having a clear example that you said of the root beer instead of just beer.
But, so I did research, and I could
Yeah.
find no evidence that Rainier ever made root beer. So,
Yeah, but what a
so
strong message.
I think you could order it off menu, is what I decided. They probably had some hidden in back.
Yes, I was just in Chicago and did one of those tours where, the prohibition and all the speakeasies. There was always a way to get what you needed. I'll have a root beer, and then they'd know what that meant,
Yep.
Well, we have the introduction of the car, right, which changes a lot of things for cycling and the investment in cycling and bike paths and so on. And it also changed neighborhoods. You have, we're kind of moving forward, right, to the city was, you mentioned, white supremacy in the city of Seattle, and folks who had money, had power and had influence and could draw up agreements or whatever, referendums, et cetera, to in their favor. And of course, at this time, there was redlining in the city that took a long time to take out of all of these ways that it was written how people could live in certain neighborhoods or not, or work in certain spaces or not, or the kind of work even that they did. How did the city, back to that from the beginning, like the Treaty of Point Elliott, but how did the redlining impact not only the people who were redlined out of access, but also impact cycling and its kind of ability to move through neighborhoods, and which neighborhoods it would move through, which spaces would have really safe infrastructure, bike paths, and so on. What was the impact of redlining and that connection of redlining and cycling, I guess?
Yeah. So the another thing I stumbled upon going through these old newspaper stories about bicycling is one of the first neighborhoods that really got started adjacent to a bike path was what was then called the Interlochen neighborhood, which is kind of along Boyer, kind of in the very north end of
Near
Capitol
Montlake.
Hill when you're getting close to, kind of between Montlake, what's now the Montlake and University Bridge, kind of in that in-between area. And the initial advertisements for this neighborhood, come live here. And it's used. It has all this coded language, because I think they didn't realize yet that they could just say whites only. So they would say like, "It'll be very congenial. We have laws in place to make sure that it will only be congenial, and there'll be no obnoxious elements living in this neighborhood." And so they're trying to say we're making this whites only area. Come live here. And it's like the very first thing. Like this is like the one of the very first roads based developments right off what was a bike path. It's just, I think these ads are happening before the boulevard is even finished with construction, right? Like they're on top of it. Boyer is one of the people who's been biking this whole time, right? One of the names that pops up right there.
Okay.
And Boyer is the one who's leading this
this congenial neighborhood.
This congenial neighborhood. So it's like right off the bat, right immediately, you have this attempt to make these kinds of neighborhoods that are aren't connected to the streetcar. That's a good thing, because we can make them exclusive and segregated. And so as the car network ends up developing and suburban sprawl occurs and car connected neighborhoods start building out, they're all copying this kind of language. And later we learn through the Supreme Court makes the decision that you can just say it. It's fine. I just redlining.
Put these covenants in.
I just put the covenants in. And then people are just like, okay, great.
Yeah.
masks off, white people only.
Right, right.
We didn't realize we could say it before. And that is, you can look through covenants that are still on the record all across the city,
Yes.
and you can find, you can even look at your own home deed, and it may never have been removed. This is some fascinating, horrifying thing to find for people, because people don't like read every word of their deed usually when they buy a home.
Right.
It may have this language still in there. It's not legal, so it's never been removed because it's superseded by the Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, I as African American, I'm always like, just remove this language. Like, I know it's superseded by this and that, but it's dangerous language.
Yeah.
It's it's offensive, but it's important that we know that it was there.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people in Seattle, what you said about Seattle, we not knowing we could just say whites only.
Right.
That's one thing you always hear from people who travel here. They're like, oh, at least in the South, I know where I stand. Seattle, you guys always talk in a code of, and I'm like, okay, what are you really saying to me? Just say it.
Yeah.
Because I think what you said was pretty racist or sexist or homophobic, but you always use a code. So I love this, that at the beginning, when you said that, it just resonates with Seattle culture. I think of, oh, well, should I say this? But really what they wanted to say was
Yes.
ABC. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that there were the people in power as a Boyer. Now I know when I ride down that street on my bike or in a car, the history of what the congenial neighborhood. They were trying to keep people out.
Yeah, and it may be illegal, but you can look at the racial makeup of neighborhoods that had these covenants, and they're still very heavily white.
Yes.
So the lasting impact is still there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like the white supremacist land claims, we have these fingerprints on our city and on our spaces that we can change the rules, and obviously we should. But they don't immediately go away. Those fingerprints last through and reinforce themselves.
They've touched people. Those fingerprints have made an impression,
Yes.
an imprint on people's minds and their hearts, and it's hard to move past that. And so in the cycling world, that was felt too, and that moves to, you have a whole chapter of racism of freeway culture also. That kind of, because Seattle, like many large metropolitan areas, started as the car culture grew, started getting rid of those street cars and focused on mass transit and freeways, and how that impacted neighborhoods and how we're still feeling that. We'll talk a little bit about Rainier Avenue, right? You talk about that. So can you talk a little bit about, since you devoted this whole 1956 to 1972, the freeway culture and what that looked like, and how that impacted those neighborhoods, talking about the redlining and who got what, depending on what your skin color was or your religion was or your gender was, and where you lived.
Yeah. Because this is one of the questions I wanted to answer when I set out. Was like, how did we build all these bike paths all across the city? How did the bicyclists allow the car drivers to take over all their bike paths? Like, how did we let that happen? And one of the now obvious, but at the time surprising to me, answers is, well, they're the same people, right? And so I realized, this early bicycling history that you're reading, that's not the start of Seattle's bicycle culture. That's the start of Seattle's car culture. And when the car came along, it just did all of those things way more effectively and at much larger scale, an industrial scale, right? And so if you follow through the car culture as it's getting stronger and stronger, it's getting more and more political power, but as more cars get added, the amount of infrastructure required to support the car keeps growing and growing and growing. You end up with the idea of a freeway. It's like, well, if we can just get rid of all those annoying crosswalks and things, and just have where the car can just flow freely and it never has to stop for anything.
Right.
That will solve all of these frustrations with driving. And that'll help us get from our segregated whites-only suburb to the city more easily and more quickly. And this is very appealing to all the people in power, right? And the problem is that the freeway has to go somewhere.
Right.
And whose
Neighborhood
neighborhood
is it going to go through?
Yep. And it's going to go through not the route that is best for a freeway. It's going to go through the route that is most politically feasible for a freeway. Like, where are people disempowered? You know, where, so, you get the, Japantown is
Yes.
completely destroyed by the construction of I-5 because the planning for the construction of I-5 is happening within 10 years of the end of internment. And the Japanese neighborhood community is scattered. Storefronts have been taken over, homes have been taken over, farms have been taken over, by the Kempers over in Bellevue, for example. And the community is not in a position to like organize itself to say, hey, you shouldn't build this freeway right through the heart of our like main street and through the heart of our neighborhood. And so that's where it goes. And it's the politically easiest place to put it. And the neighborhood is demolished to the ground. And then they have all these plans to do the same thing to Judkins Park. But people have already seen by this time what happened with I-5. And they know now, like that I-5 happened before environmental review. There was no like public process of like, hey, is this okay if we put this here?
Community meetings, nothing like that.
At the time, if the engineers said, this is where I want it to go, and the politicians said, okay, here's the money, then that's where it went. And that was the end of the conversation, right? Well, by the time the planning is getting underway to build the R.H. Thompson Expressway, which would more or less follow where MLK Way is now, and as well as I-90 needs to come in and connect to I-5 somehow. And on the way, it's going to connect to the R.H. Thompson freeway. People have seen I-5, and they're like, that's what they have planned for our neighborhood. We need to organize to stop this. So this wide coalition of people starts to get organized and say, this is not okay. Like, our neighborhoods are valuable. They're not just a place to put your freeway. Right. These places are where people live, and there's a reason to preserve it and protect it. But so this coalition includes like the Black Panther Party in the Central District. It's very, very on the ground organized, and they're going around, and like Larry Gossett got a lot of his early work or as an organizer, was going around and just knocking on people's doors in Judkins Park and saying, hey, do you know that the state wants to build a freeway on top of your house?
Right.
And it keeps finding, every time he asks people, they're like, no, I had no idea because the state was planning this.
They're not sharing it. They're not sending you a letter in the mail saying, we're going to be doing this, just letting you know. No, they're just doing it.
They'll let you know when they're going to buy your house at, rock bottom prices. Yes. And they successfully say, hey, well, we're going to try to stop it, get organized, join our movement, come out to these meetings, and let's show how unpopular this idea is. And it works. People protest. People get together in numbers, and they create a wide coalition and to fight this expansion plan and the R.H. Thompson Expressway. And, the people in power think it's going to go through anyway, right? This is just like a little annoying thing we have to deal with, right? And eventually the people force the city to put it up to a referendum. Let us at least vote on it. And everyone is convinced that they're going to pass easily because this is progress. This is the future. These are freeways. Like, this is, don't get in the way of progress, right? But the people reject all of the freeways that are put up to them. There's a Bay Freeway down in South Lake Union. There's supposed to be like a Alaska Way Viaduct style freeway between South Lake Union and Lake Union that we killed. The voters killed, and then they reject the R.H. Thompson Expressway in its entirety. And then they also force the state to go back and redraw the plans for how I-90 is going to come in through the neighborhood, because they were just going to level Judkins Park. Was the original plan. It was going to be this big trench just through the neighborhood, and there would be a couple bridges where you could get across, and that would be it. That's the only way you could cross I-90 is like a couple bridges. And otherwise, it's this open trench freeway thing.
And that was happening. We weren't unique in that. There were a lot of cities across Detroit, I can name, happening where they just would gut Black neighborhoods or neighborhoods of color and separate people and have a freeway go right through that.
And routing it through a neighborhood, a problematic neighborhood,
quote unquote,
right, was considered a benefit.
Right.
Like this is actually, we're doing this this is going to make our city better.
Right.
It'd be better if it was just a freeway and not a neighborhood for people who aren't white. And that was, part of a lot of urban renewal projects were, framed as this will be better, but really it's just we're tearing down entire neighborhoods and replace them with,
and hoping
some kind of piece
away.
hoping people just go away. to where? I don't know, because
Exactly.
all these other neighborhoods are whites only, so they can't go there. And yeah, so this is, I think, one thing where Seattle's geography kind of helps us. A lot of other places just did it, and they were successful because it was relatively easy to do it. Seattle is an extremely difficult place to build a freeway network. The hills and the waterways are fighting and making it as expensive as possible to build such a thing. And in a way that slowed them down enough that the people were able to organize and then stop them or dramatically scale them back. So like now, like the people were able to win the freeway lid that's Sam Smith Park, that's over the top of I-90 through the neighborhood. That's only happens because people got very organized and were threatening to kill the project entirely. And they kept having to compromise until it could finally get through. And so that's the version we have is not a total win for the community that was fighting it. The goal was no I-90, no second bridge across the lake. But they got a lot of wins for the neighborhood. And it's, obviously, now we have a light rail station there, and and there's a bike path,
there's a beautiful,
and
green
playgrounds,
sounds, greenways to sound to
mountains of sound,
mountain
greenway.
of sound, greenway.
And it's so much, it's obviously much better than it was gonna be.
Right, and you think about the family. Well, it is interesting because, as we mentioned, there's the politics side of what's going on, which your book I highly recommend that people, read and learn more about. And then there's also the safety side. Mm-hmm. Because there are so many things you bring up that I would never have thought about when it comes to cycling and that intersection of so many things. But there's also the safety side of just being on a bike. We're talking about cars, we're talking about freeways, we're talking about changing the bike paths into these, boulevards for cars. And there's got to be, there's a collision course just that happened right away. And you start your book by dedicating it to the more than 5,100 people who have died in Seattle traffic collisions since the arrival of the automobile. There was, in your book you mentioned, there's 100 Deathless Days campaign that the city tried to go on. Let's not have any more car and bicycle deaths. There's obviously city of Seattle as well as other places trying to figure out how we can have better road share dedicated bicycle lanes. As a bicyclist, I'm downtown and there'll be a light for me as a bicyclist, and then there's the light for cars. And you always just hope nobody turns, or in Capitol Hill, turns into you when it's you have the green light and they have the red light, which you always are looking over your shoulder, right? So safety is a huge part of your book and what you do as a blogger. I'm wondering, with that said, how do you think, what direction are we on? Because there's been so much going on. There's committees now in City of Seattle for pedestrians and bicyclists and all of this, kind of movement. There's always been activists in the bicycle community. Where do you think we are now, and where are we now in terms of safety for cyclists? And what is still that tension that you hear from drivers that exists with cyclists and drivers? So where are we now in terms of safety if I'm a bicyclist and I want to get out there, and also what are drivers saying about, because this is the idea of like who owns the streets. Mm-hmm. So if you have any, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on that one.
Where we are on safety is not where we need to be. That's for sure. The safety rate, like the injury and death rate for people in cars and on bikes, is getting better. and the injury and death rate for people on foot or in wheelchairs using a mobility device is skyrocketing.
Yes,
It's horrible.
Yeah.
And is undoing any small, relatively small improvement we're making in, reducing like the injury rate for people in cars or on bikes is not anywhere close to enough to offset the horrible increase in pedestrian deaths and injuries. And that is a nationwide trend. That's not a Seattle specific thing. There's been a lot of studying like of why is this happening, because this has been like the last decade where it's been climbing. There's probably several reasons, but one of the biggest ones that you just cannot get away from is that it is more commonly an SUV that is is involved in the collision. They're more likely to be fatal if an SUV is involved. And American car sales have trended towards SUVs heavily over the past 2 decades.
Yeah.
And so that means like, you got to think like the car population that's out there is, it lags behind current sales rates, right? So, for like 20 years, people have been buying SUVs at a high rate. And just now in the past 10 years, you're starting to see the SUV rate get to such a extent that they're more likely to be involved in these collisions, and therefore those collisions are more likely to be deadly.
Heavier, more fatal. Absolutely.
They're bigger, heavier, more fatal, and they have higher hoods, so people are more likely to get knocked down on the ground and then rolled over instead of knocked up onto the windshield. It's like really gruesome details when you get into this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also that U.S. safety standards, vehicle safety standards, have no consideration for whether or not the driver of the vehicle can see other people on the road. So if you have this big hood that extends out further and is sitting up higher, there's people who might be entering a crosswalk. They literally cannot see them. They're just out of view entirely, especially if they're short. If the driver's short, you can't see.
Or like you said, a wheelchair or someone elderly, bending over, or child, or
people with disabilities are at way higher risk of being seriously injured or killed. Like you have to trust. Our road system requires being able to trust that if you're going to cross a crosswalk and it's your turn, that the people driving can see you and then obey your right of way, like respect your right of way. Like that's the only way that it can work. And there's problems, people not paying attention, people looking at their phone. Sure, like that's all sort of part of it, but a huge part of it is just like visibility is horrible now, and even if someone's paying attention, they might kill someone. And it's very, very, very frustrating for so many reasons. It's the amount of violence and hardship that it is putting on communities and families, and is just enormous. And the problem is, it requires like a national fix,
right?
And that specific problem requires a national fix. And so the city's in this place where, we can do things to make our roads safer. We can design our roads so they're safer. We can't force car companies to change the designs of their cars.
Right.
So we have to respond with road design fixes.
Do the best we can, because there's all these other elements that are out of our control.
Yeah. And so Seattle has a Vision Zero program. Yeah. It's been going since 2015. And every time they we do a Vision Zero project, it works really well. The problem is we just don't do very many of them. And the death rate on the streets that we haven't improved, that we haven't made these safety changes on, is climbing so fast that our fatality rate for the city is going up, even though we're doing these projects and we're fixing this little street here, this little section of street here. It's not enough. It's not keeping up with the climb and the deadliness of the vehicles that are on our street. And so, that's why I'm hopeful that this, the city, a current mayor, takes this problem very seriously and is going to prioritize this safety work. Voters of Seattle just in 2024 approved the transportation levy that includes more money for safety improvements than we've ever had before. So if we haven't yet SDOT is still sort of spinning up because you got to hire a bunch of new staff and get a bunch of new things in place to spend that money effectively. And so they're not yet spending it at the rate that it's budgeted for. But I'm hopeful that they will get there and they will be able to build out everything that the people have entrusted them to build, and that we can actually improve this problem. Because this is not a hopeless problem. We know how to fix it. Like, we know things that we can do to fix it. It just requires a combination of actual, investment, but most importantly, political investment, because sometimes these changes are going to require, reducing the number of lanes on a busy street, and some people don't like that.
Yeah, they're going to lose their minds.
And so
let's just say well, I think another thing is I've noticed since COVID also, it seems like speeding, people running red lights, these, I think that it's all around. It's the political will, and then it's the personal. It's us as humans just slowing down, looking around us, and realizing we're sharing the road with a lot of things. It could people, bikes, we're cars, we're sharing it with animals, everybody is trying to use these pathways. And I just know back in the day, there were those white bikes where it would show somebody who had been killed by a car. I agree, cars are just getting bigger. We have a little flat, small 94 car. So what you said about, the impact is so different. As we said, there's so many things to talk about. I do want to, as we move forward, and thank you for giving us a little bit of an update of where we're at with kind of addressing safety. We've talked about politics, social issues, and all of this, safety, transportation, infrastructure. But there's one thing that really I want to just share too about in your book that really, I'm wondering if this is unique to Seattle. Seattle has so many bicycle enthusiasts. We also have, like, you can bike somewhere and you see a shop and you can run in, and maybe it's in the middle of somewhere, which I know there used to be a lot more bike shops around, but these communities where you can go in, get a little tune-up, pump some air in your tire, and keep moving. I love that about our city. But also we have these, what I love, unique bicycle groups, clubs, and events. You mentioned the naked bike rides, bike disco, Seattle night rides. I mean, what is going on here? What it makes Seattle cyclists, I think those all sound really fun. I probably will not sign up for that naked bike ride one, but I think it's all fun, and I'm wondering if there's something unique about the temperament and the personalities of Seattle cyclists that you've seen compared to other cities. Maybe other cities have even some more fun and unique and wacky days or nights, but what is unique about a Seattle bicyclist? Would you say?
Well, what's fascinating to me right now is that something is happening in bicycling, and like as we speak, like there is this boom occurring, and there's so many new people biking, and they're starting to gather in surprising ways. And I'm fascinated to watch it happen, because I think, like, a lot of this story, like, what does bicycling mean, and like what is the bicycle culture like what is it? What was the group ride scene like? Is all like changing right now. Like, it's forming sort of organically into the bike disco was. I remember seeing photos from like the early ones. It was like 4 people or so, with like a speaker set, and now it's this whole thing that you can join, and it's just like a night party, and there's music and just good vibes kind of ride, and. Critical Mass is back.
Critical Mass, yeah.
Which is, we had a long lull where Critical Mass wasn't really much of a thing in Seattle. It was very big in the 90s and the early 2000s, and it kind of like lost a lot of steam. And then now it's back, and it means something different to people who are doing it now. Critical Mass is showing up at like scenes where there's been like a pedestrian death, like someone's been killed in a crosswalk. They'll show up the next, the last Friday of the month. They'll show up at that spot, and they'll shut down the whole intersection as a sign of protest. Like, this is not acceptable. We should not allow and accept that people just die on our streets.
Right.
Like, we need to change this. There's things that we can change. The last time there was a pedestrian death at Bellevue and Pine in Capitol Hill, and the critical mass group came in and they put up these barriers to create like a little intersection protection area at the crosswalk where it happened, and the city just went in and made it permanent. So it's like, I mean, there's something cool happening right now, and the culture's changing, and like, you know, it's an interesting time to I guess join, because it's not prescribed, you know, like what it means. You know, in the book I talk about each generation that comes along, the bicycling means something different, and people use it as a tool for something different. And I think right now people are writing the next thing that is, and we don't know what it is yet, but it's being written now. And in 10 years we will look back and we'll know what it meant.
Oh, this is what it was. Yeah. Well, you know, speaking of which, then the electric bike, where does that fit in? And do you see prices coming down? Because I wouldn't mind, and getting lighter, because I wouldn't mind getting one, as I said, you know, hitting the hills. I want to get that workout. You know, you mentioned the natural health benefits of just getting on a bike. But what do you think is, and where does, I bet there's some separation of people who don't have electric bikes and people who do, or maybe not. Could I join these rides and have my electric bike? But where do you think the future of that technology is going?
Yeah, well, first of all, you definitely can. If you have an e-bike, are pretty much invited. Most places, you know, if you're not racing, you know, it's
right.
You know, maybe some training rides wouldn't have e-bikes, but yeah, I mean the e-bike has plummeted in price in like the past 5 years. A lot of e-bikes companies have gone out of business because of that. You know, sort of like a little bit of a glut, and where it's all in chaos. The bike industry is complete chaos right now. But the sale of e-bikes has obviously had a huge impact on Seattle because of the hills, and it's made bicycling so much more accessible to so many more people. And you still get exercise riding an e-bike. You just don't get the like deep, you know, heavy breathing, like I feel like my legs are about to fall off kind of exercise, which I think is a positive for a lot of people. They're not looking, you know, you get the amount of exercise you get from like a brisk walk, you know, and that's nice. That's good. That's what doctors want you to do. They want you to do that every day. Get a brisk walk in. If you ride an e-bike around, you're getting that. So, yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of tangents we could go off on that, but I'll just say, actual e-bikes are currently legal anywhere. A bike is legal so long as it's not a mountain bike trail. Pretty much, you know, any trail, any bike lane. If it's a class 1, 2, or class 1 or 2 e-bike, which is what most e-bikes are, they're legally allowed in those places, and that's been, you know, a bunch of law changes over the past 10 years to make that happen. And just say like, hey, you know, these bikes go just about the same speed as like someone on a pedal bike could go. You know, sometimes they can go a little faster up the hills maybe, but they're compatible with regular bicycling, and so they can go where bicycles go. And I think for the most part that's working out really, really well. And it is contributing to the explosion that we're seeing of the amount of people that are biking right now. You know, we're smashing records on the bike counters across the city. You know, seeing more people than ever biking. Like we're at a new high water mark right now. Like there's no looking into the past. Like we're creating it right as we speak. You know what Seattle bicycling looks like, and which is just really exciting. E-bikes are part of that. I don't personally like riding a scooter, but scooters are certainly part of that. There's lots of people who really like riding scooters. You know, and they're you know, it's a small, you know, no emissions vehicle that people are getting around on. So like, you know, it's you know, it doesn't need to be my cup of tea to like recognize like, oh, there's something cool about that. So yeah, I mean, I think that our city is doing a lot of stuff that I think people could feel proud of. You know, it's you know, we're making progress where a lot of other places are stalling out. And I think Seattle's really emerging as a leader in how some of these things can actually work. You know, we're not building bike lanes just to appease the small minority of people who already bicycle. We are really building them for a future in which more people feel invited to use them and to bicycle on our streets. And that's exactly what we're now seeing. We've built this bike network, especially the bike network downtown. We're seeing people bike downtown who, when I moved here, it was like hardcore commuters and bike messengers. And that was it. Like that was the only people who would bike downtown. And now it's everyone. I
Yeah.
biked downtown with my 7-year-old, well, she was 7 at the time, to go to a Sounders game, and it was great. And it never felt dangerous.
Right.
And
Oh,
that
yeah.
blew my mind that, wow, we can do that now. That's now possible. And you get people who look at a street with a bike lane like that's a protected bike lane, separate from traffic, and they can see themselves there.
Right. Maybe I can do that. Exactly. Because
And-
I won't have to. Yes, it seems safer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before you had to mix with traffic. There's a lot of people
no.
who are like, I'm never doing that. That looks crazy.
Yeah.
Like, that's not me.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing it happen. Like, it's not just a talking point. It really is occurring right now. And we're proving, like, you can trust this concept that if you build it, they will come. Like, if you build safe bike infrastructure, the more people will feel invited to try bicycling, and it's happening right now, and it's really exciting.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this conversation.
Oh, thank
There's
you.
so many more questions I had, but I look forward to following you on your blog. Tell us about your blog.
Yeah, so it's seattlebikeblog.com.
Okay. And ask maybe, can people write you if they have questions to your blog?
Absolutely. My phone number and email are on the blog.
Okay,
So,
we heard it here at WTBBL. I wanna thank you again for joining us today and sharing just a little bit about your book. Once again, it's Tom Fucoloro, Biking Uphill in the Rain: The Story of Seattle from Behind the Handlebars. And we appreciate it so much, Tom. Thank you. Any last thing you want to say?
no, thank you for having me. I'm so excited about the audio version of this that will be available to the Talking Book and Braille Library patrons soon. I don't know when it is, but I'm so excited about that. When I found out that was happening, I was just so honored.
Oh, yeah. I know. I can't wait to hear the reader also, and also to just be able to think about what you've said, the history, where we are, the number of communities of color that also have bike clubs now, as well as folks who are part of the broader biking community, and how we can all be more safe on the road, some ideas, and that you left us with a positive note that things are possible and that things can get better, so we can all enjoy the ride, whether we're on our bike or e-bike or whatever, and share the roads together. So thank you again, Tom.
Yeah, thank you.
Biking Uphill in the Rain: The Story of Seattle Behind the Handlebars is currently in production as an audiobook in the catalog of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. It'll be available with the class ID DBC 30158. We'll let you know in a later episode when it's ready for download. If you have any questions or comments about the library, or to see if you qualify for our services, visit WTBBL.org or leave us a voicemail at 206-615-0400 or toll free at 800-542-0866. This episode of Literary Notes is a production of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library based in Seattle, Washington. The interview was conducted by Merri Ann Osborne. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Thanks for listening.